All right, there's been a lot of focus by some, as you heard, on the sports rorts saga coming out in dribs and drabs from Senate estimates. But to my mind, this next issue is far more serious. And it relates to information brought to light in last night's hearings and real concerns as to whether WA's $30 billion Browse LNG project will be allowed to go ahead. The Federal Environment Department are arguing that the project's emissions, almost 500 kilometres off the coast of Broome, could impact greater moss growth in the Snowy Mountains, that's right, on the other side of the country, and the health of the Great Barrier Reef in Queensland. We'll also get into those $600,000 wind turbines too. Joining me now, the man who was sitting in hearings last night when all of this came to light and helped, I think, drag it out of officials, Senator Matt Canavan, live from Canberra. Senator Canavan, I'm going to get into those issues in just a moment, but you heard Professor Fells there. I know the National Party's had some strong words said to me behind closed doors about FIRB. Do you think there's a case for reform?
Well, there certainly it has come to light that there was a case for the changes we made years ago, Peter, and they were fought tooth and nail, as you know. A few years ago, the Nationals Party, I suppose, had a win, arguing that we should do more reviews, that we should reduce the threshold to allow more agricultural land to be reviewed. Thank God we did that. Now, in terms of what was discussed just before, I do think absolutely that FIRB has to have teeth. It's great that we review these investments. In more recent years, we've had the guts to say no to some deals, like the Kidman deal more recently. We've been the first government to do some of those things. But the problem is sometimes when conditions are put on sales, there is very little remedial action that FIRB can take under the Act. About the only thing they can do is ask for the company that has been bought by this time and all process to be split up and effectively sold off. Now, they've never done that. It's quite a draconian step to do that. There needs to be something in between doing absolutely nothing, which is the default at the moment, and going for the absolute Damocles sword. So that I think does need to be looked at, that enforcement of the conditions that FIRB places on foreign investments.
All right, let's get into some other areas. Let's talk wind turbines. Coming out of Senate estimates, we know turbines cost over $600,000 to taxpayers. $600,000 is renewable credit certificates, other subsidies and other things. But of course they run at about 40% capacity, which was new to me. That's sort of the amortised figure for turbines across the country. But we also know that 2/3 of them are foreign owned. This is all a bit of a concern.
Well, look, let me just step this through for people, because I've had a lot of comments today from people outraged at these figures, but also there's a lack of understanding here because it's hidden. It's a hidden cost in your power bill, these prices. But the basic story is every time you pass a wind turbine on the road, each of those turbines are getting roughly, on evidence last night at Senate estimates, about $600,000 a year. Not bad work if you can get it. And this is how it works. So a wind turbine, if it ran every hour of every day, it could run for 8,760 hours. That's how many hours there are in a year. They don't run every hour of every year, as you said, or as the department said last night. A new wind turbine apparently can do about 40%. That's about the time that the wind's on, that it can produce power. So it's just a between 2,000 and 2,500 hours a year that these wind turbines will run for. At the moment, they produce about 5 megawatts an hour, they were told last night, so 5 times those 2,000, you get to 10,000. Then you times that by the current market price and you get to a figure of over $600,000 a year. Now, I said the other week that some of these renewable energy types are the biggest dole bludgers in our country. They only turn up to work when they want to. They're also the biggest paid dole bludgers in our nation as well on those figures.
And look, it's extraordinary. It is extraordinary. And then, of course, in the same hearings, there was quite a lot of debate about the $30 billion, B for billion dollar, LNG export project Browse. It's off the coast of about Broome, I think it is, on WA, in WA's north. Apparently, I mean, there's the issue there of Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions. I'll get you to talk to that in just a moment. But also the impact of Browse on moss in the Snowies and the Great Barrier Reef.
Well, this is how the green tape that's infected so much of our economy is creeping into other areas that we never thought possible. You might have seen last week that the upgrade to the Heathrow Airport in London has been knocked off because a court has ruled that its carbon emission impact could damage the climate. It's inconsistent with the British government's net zero emissions goal. So apparently now the people of London can't have adequate air services because of that goal. I don't think that was explained to them when the United Kingdom signed up to this. And this is why we've got to be careful with this lazy rhetoric around things like net zero emissions, because again, here in Australia, the early stage of this are being seen. The Browse project off Western Australia, a very important project for the Western Australian economy. As you said, $30 billion, 2,000 jobs in construction and thousands more in operation. Very important. The WA economy's been doing it tough. It's been doing it tough since the mining downturn and it's still not recovered. So it needs a project like this. But now the Department of Environment is saying, look, because this will create about 38 million tonnes of carbon emissions, that's about 0.1% of the world's carbon emissions, because that will be created by burning the oil and gas in Korea and Japan, etc., that might cause the temperature to go up, and then we'll have less snowfall in alpine regions of Australia, which will hurt native vegetation in alpine regions of Australia. So that's why you've got to look at this impact. Now, this has never been done before for oil and gas projects. The law hasn't changed. The government's policy hasn't changed. It is an example of you give an inch to some public servants and they'll take a mile.
So, Senator,
and before you know it, we can't build anything anymore.
So, Senator, let me just jump in there to underscore the point you're making, that the assessments of the emissions, the count, is counted by Australia because the resource comes from Australia, but it's not burnt and used in Australia, it's exported offshore.
That's right.
But we're forced to account for it here, and this is the same thing that's happening to mines, particularly in New South Wales. Am I right?
That's under this interpretation. You're absolutely right. It's a similar test that's been applied by the New South Wales regulator, the Independent Planning Commission, on a coal mine that was going to send coal to Korea. And again, they're saying that, well, because the coal will be burnt in Korea and cause carbon emissions, that's inconsistent with the New South Wales government's net zero emissions policy. And suddenly the people of Bylong in Western New South Wales can't have jobs. Again, that wasn't explained to the people of Bylong when the New South Wales government signed up to net zero emissions. And so we've got to be very careful with this kind of stuff because it's a thin edge of the wedge that suddenly sets up a massive hurdle for anything to be done in our country. Now, and the absurdity of all this, of course, is that Korea will get its coal from somewhere else. Other countries will get their oil and gas from somewhere else, regardless of whether the Browse project goes ahead or not. And so there'll be no change to the world's environment. We'll just have the only climate change that will occur is the economic climate in places like regional WA and regional New South Wales. They'll have fewer jobs and be doing it tougher thanks to this interpretation. So that's why I exposed it last night, because I think everybody out there would see this is absurd, why we do that. No one who passed the EPBC Act in 1999 would have thought at the time that it would be used to try and stop a project happening off the coast of WA because of its potential environmental impact on the
Senator
other side
Canavan,
of our continent.
Just before we go, I mean, how much is this project at risk?
Well, look, I would hope that the project will still go ahead. In theory, the proponents here can do an assessment and say, look, it is only 0.1% of the world's carbon emissions. Korea and Japan will get their oil and gas from somewhere else. Surely the project can still go ahead. What I'm concerned about is the long game here. Once this hurdle is set up, you know how this works. It becomes harder and harder and harder. And when companies look at where they're going to put their capital around the world, it's just another thing they've got to worry about when it comes to Australia and getting approvals that might not be there in other countries. So we potentially miss out on the job. So this is why I think it's got to be. We've got to hit this on the head. And I'm going to write to the Minister for Environment, I'm doing that at the moment, to ask her, Susan Lee, to look at this and take this off the table, because it is not a reasonable interpretation of the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. That Act says that you only have to look at things which facilitate to a major extent an impact, and no one can argue that this project could facilitate to a major extent lower snowfall in the alpine regions of Australia.
Matt Canavan, I tell you what, your cabinet's lost, but you're the backbenchers' gain for keeping them honest on all of these sorts of issues. Thanks very much for your time tonight.
No worries, Peter. Have a good evening.